It was just another ordinary day in the life of Sarah Johnson. Well, ordinary to everyone else. To her, though, it felt like every day was a battle. A battle to make ends meet. A battle to hide the truth from her coworkers. A battle to keep pushing forward, even when every step seemed heavier than the last. Sarah worked as an assistant at SpaceX. She had always dreamed of working for one of the most innovative companies in the world, but the reality was far from glamorous. The long hours, the mounting student loans, and the nagging feeling that she wasn't quite where she was meant to be made her question whether all the effort was worth it. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Still, she kept her head down and worked hard. After all, she couldn't afford to do anything else. It was a Thursday afternoon when it all changed. Sarah was sitting at her desk, typing out emails to clients, when an unexpected notification popped up on her screen. It wasn't just another email from HR or a colleague. No, this one had a subject line that stopped her dead in her tracks. From Elon Musk, a personal message. She blinked at the screen, unsure if it was real. Could it be a joke? After all, she didn't even work directly with Elon. She had only seen him in passing at a company event once, where he gave his usual charismatic speech about Mars and humanity's future in space. She had never imagined that he would reach out to her. With trembling fingers, Sarah clicked open the message. Hi Sarah, I've heard a lot of great things about you. Let me know if you need anything at all. I'm always happy to help. Elon. For a moment, Sarah sat frozen. Was this for real? Had Elon Musk, the CEO of one of the most powerful tech companies in the world, really just sent her a personal message? It didn't make sense. The idea of asking for help felt foreign to her, like a strange concept she'd never fully understood. She had worked so hard to get where she was. She couldn't allow anyone to think she was weak or incapable. But something about Elon's message made her hesitate. There was sincerity in his words, something genuine that she hadn't expected. She was about to close the email when another one popped up. This time, it was from her supervisor, who was asking her to join a video call. She quickly answered, still shaken by the previous message. As the video call began, she tried to push her thoughts about the message aside. Sarah, how's everything going? Her supervisor asked. Good, just handling the usual tasks, she replied, forcing a smile. As the call continued, she couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more happening here. Something she didn't understand. Why would Elon Musk reach out to her of all people? She was just another assistant in a company full of brilliant engineers and scientists. Surely, there were more important people he could be spending his time on. It wasn't until later that evening, after finishing up her work and heading home, that she decided to dig deeper into Elon's message. Her curiosity gnawed at her, and she found herself wondering if maybe, just maybe, there was more to this than she realized. As Sarah sat on her couch in her modest apartment, she opened the email again. She stared at the words, reading them over and over. Let me know if you need anything at all. Her eyes wandered to the cluttered apartment around her. She had lived here for the past few years, ever since moving out of her mom's house after college. The apartment wasn't much, barely enough space for her, let alone anyone else. Still, it was hers. She had worked hard to afford it, even though the bills never seemed to stop piling up. She thought about the state of her finances, how close she was to being unable to pay rent next month. The feeling of dread that crept in every time she opened her bank account. And then there was the fact that no one at work knew the truth. How much she struggled, how much she sacrificed just to keep going. Most people thought she was just another young woman climbing the corporate ladder. What they didn't know was that every paycheck felt like it was barely enough to cover the essentials. Sarah hesitated for a long time before replying to Elon. She didn't want to seem desperate, but something about the sincerity in his message made her pause. Maybe it was time to stop pretending that everything was fine. Maybe it was time to let someone in. Hi Elon. Thank you for your kind offer. I really appreciate it. Honestly, things have been tough lately, and it's hard to keep up with everything. But I don't want to impose on you. I'll keep pushing forward. Sarah. She hit send and immediately regretted it. Was she being too vulnerable? Was this the right thing to do? She stared at the screen, waiting for a response, but none came. It was late, and she knew she needed to sleep. As Sarah lay in bed, her mind raced. What if Elon's message was just an act of kindness? What if he really did want to help? But as much as she tried to silence the thoughts, they kept swirling around her, threatening to consume her. She realized she was no longer just dealing with her day-to-day struggles. Now, she was wrestling with the possibility that her life might change in ways she could never have anticipated. Suddenly, her phone buzzed again. She opened it, her heart racing. New message from Elon Musk. Sarah, don't worry about a thing. I'll make sure things get taken care of. Just wait. I'll be in touch soon. Elon. Sarah stared at the screen in disbelief. What was happening? Sarah sat there, staring at the message for what felt like an eternity. The words seemed so simple, yet they were loaded with an implication she couldn't quite grasp. I'll make sure things get taken care of. She ran a hand through her hair and leaned back in her chair, her mind spinning. What did he mean by that? Was this really happening? Did someone as influential as Elon Musk really care about her well-being? And why? Her thoughts swirled around her, but there was one thing she couldn't deny. This felt like a lifeline. But before she could contemplate further, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a notification from her bank. Another bill reminder. The due date was fast approaching, and she knew she had to come up with the money. Somehow, Sarah sighed and looked out the window. The evening sky painted in soft shades of orange and purple. This was her reality. No matter how much she dreamed of a different life, the bills kept piling up. She had worked for years to get this far, but every step forward felt like 2 steps back. Her mind drifted back to her childhood. Growing up wasn't easy. She remembered how she and her mom had shared a tiny apartment, barely able to make ends meet. Her mom worked multiple jobs, often leaving Sarah to fend for herself after school. It was just the two of them, and they made it work, barely. But it wasn't just the lack of money that shaped Sarah's childhood. It was the constant reminder that dreams didn't always come true for people like her. That's why, when she was old enough, she'd made it her mission to prove everyone wrong. She would break free from this cycle of struggle, no matter what it took. She pushed herself harder than anyone she knew. She studied late into the night, sacrificing weekends with friends just to catch up on coursework. She took on internships and side jobs, all while trying to maintain some semblance of a normal life. Eventually, all the effort paid off when she landed a position at SpaceX. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a step toward her goal, a step toward something better. Yet, even now, sitting alone in her apartment, she couldn't help but feel stuck. The financial strain, the loneliness. Sometimes, it felt like no matter how hard she worked, she'd never be able to escape the weight of it all. That's when her phone buzzed again, interrupting her thoughts. Sarah, I want to meet you, the message read. Tell me when you're free. I have something important I need to discuss with you. She stared at the message, unsure how to react. Meet her? Elon Musk, the billionaire founder of SpaceX, wanted to meet with her? She had to be dreaming. This couldn't be real. She read the message again, her heart racing. It was real. For a moment, she thought about ignoring it. It all felt too surreal, too overwhelming. But there was something in the way he wrote it, something in his words that made her feel seen. She typed back quickly, her fingers trembling. Hi, Elon. I'm available tomorrow after work. Let me know if that works for you. She hit send, instantly regretting it. What could he possibly want with her? She was just an assistant, just someone who made sure schedules were kept and meetings were coordinated. Why would he reach out to someone like her? But as she lay in bed that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted. Maybe this was the moment that would change everything for her. Maybe it wasn't just a random act of kindness, but something bigger. The next day, after a long workday filled with back-to-back meetings, Sarah found herself anxiously awaiting Elon's response. She checked her phone constantly, feeling the weight of every passing minute. Then, just as she was about to pack up and leave for the night, a message from him popped up. I'll be at your place in an hour. Get ready. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had agreed to meet him, but she hadn't expected him to come to her apartment. Her thoughts raced. What was she supposed to do now? Her apartment was far from impressive. Bare walls, a worn-out couch, and clutter everywhere. She hadn't prepared for a visit from someone like Elon Musk. She quickly ran around, straightening up as best as she could, but nothing she did could make the place feel less temporary, less like a space that belonged to someone who was just barely making it. The knock on her door came sooner than she expected. Sarah took a deep breath and opened the door, her heart in her throat. And there he was. Elon Musk stood on the other side, wearing his signature black t-shirt and jeans, his gaze scanning the room. It wasn't the first time she'd seen him in person, but it was the first time she felt like she was seeing him for real. No stage lights, no grand speeches, just a man standing in her humble apartment, looking at her as if he had all the time in the world. He smiled warmly. "Hey, Sarah. Thanks for letting me come by. I hope I'm not interrupting anything." She was too stunned to speak for a moment. No, not at all. Please come in." He stepped inside, his eyes taking in the apartment with a mix of curiosity and understanding. There was no judgment in his gaze, only quiet observation. "You know," Elon said as he sat down on the couch, "I've been reading a lot about you. Your work ethic, your dedication. It's impressive. I admire that." Sarah didn't know what to say. She had never imagined someone like him paying attention to someone like her. But here he was, sitting in her apartment like this was all normal. "Thank you," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I try my best." Elon leaned forward slightly. "I don't think you're giving yourself enough credit. It's not just about working hard. It's about believing in yourself. And I think you've got a lot of potential." Sarah swallowed hard. She had always believed in her potential, but sometimes it felt like no one else did. And now, here was Elon Musk, someone who had achieved more than she could ever dream, telling her that she had potential. His words felt surreal, like they were meant for someone else. "I appreciate that," she said, her voice shaking slightly. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the conversation settling in. And then Elon did something that left Sarah speechless. "You know," he said, "I think it's time you get the chance to do more. I'm not just here to visit you as a form of charity. I believe in helping people realize their worth. And I want to see what you can do when you have the right support." Sarah blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. "Support? What do you mean?" "I'm offering you a chance to work on something big, something that could change your life," Elon said, his eyes locking onto hers. "But first, let me help you with your immediate needs. We'll get your situation sorted out. No one should have to struggle like this." Sarah couldn't process his words fully. The emotions hit her all at once. Shock, disbelief, hope. Her mind raced as she tried to understand what was happening. "Let's take it one step at a time," Elon added with a small smile. "But know this, I believe in you." And just like that, her world had shifted. The words hung in the air, a strange promise in the quiet apartment. Elon Musk believed in her? The thought felt so out of reach, like a dream she could never touch. And yet, here he was, offering her a chance to change everything. Sarah's heart raced. She had worked so hard for so long, always striving to prove herself. But now, faced with an opportunity that felt bigger than anything she had ever imagined, she found herself at a loss for words. Was this real? Was he serious? Or was this just another one of those fleeting moments where people with power made empty promises? "I know this might be overwhelming," Elon continued, his voice calm and steady, "but I wouldn't say it if I didn't mean it. I've seen potential in you from the start. You just need the right tools, the right environment to thrive." She tried to keep her composure, but the truth was, she wasn't sure how to process it all. Her life had been a constant grind, always trying to stay afloat. The idea of something more, something bigger than her current struggles, was a foreign concept. She had always dreamed of a life where she didn't have to worry about bills, where she could just breathe for a change. But now, as she sat across from Elon, the weight of her dreams was suddenly tangible. Was this the moment everything would change? Could it really be that simple? "So, what exactly are you offering?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling slightly. She hadn't meant to sound doubtful, but it was hard to believe in something so out of reach. Elon smiled warmly, as if he had expected her question. "I want to help you take the next step. It's not just about your work at SpaceX. It's about what you can do beyond that. The world is full of opportunities for people with vision, and I believe you have what it takes to make an impact. But first, we need to address the basics. If you don't have your foundation set, how can you reach for the stars? Sarah nodded slowly, still processing. The words were heavy, but there was a sense of something new sparking inside her, something that had been dormant for years. Hope. I've arranged for a financial advisor to meet with you next week, Elon continued. We'll help you sort out your bills, get your financial situation under control, and give you a plan that'll allow you to focus on what really matters. I don't want you worrying about how you'll make ends meet while trying to chase your dreams. The offer was unexpected, but something about it felt right. Sarah had always been good at managing her time, her energy, but when it came to managing her money, she was out of her depth. She had been scraping by, hoping that one day it would get easier. But it hadn't. And now, with Elon's help, maybe it would. Maybe she could stop thinking about her next paycheck and start thinking about the future. That's incredible, she said quietly, her voice almost a whisper. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything yet, Elon replied. But let's start with this. Trust that I'm here to help. You've got a lot of potential, Sarah, and I'm not the only one who sees it. Sarah's mind raced with thoughts and emotions she couldn't fully grasp. It was hard to let herself believe that someone like Elon Musk, someone who had revolutionized industries, believed in her. For so long, she had carried the weight of self-doubt, of wondering if anyone truly saw her value. But now, for the first time in a long time, someone was offering her a lifeline. Elon stood up and looked around the room, still taking in the simplicity of her apartment. This place, it's a reflection of your current situation, but it doesn't define you. You've got the heart and the drive to do something bigger. I'm just here to make sure you have the tools to build what's next. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She had never heard anyone speak to her like this before. She had always been told to be practical, to stay grounded, to not reach too far. But Elon was telling her that her dreams were worth something, that she was worth something. I don't know how to thank you, she said, standing up as well. The words felt inadequate, but they were all she could offer in that moment. You don't need to thank me, Sarah, Elon said with a smile. This is just the beginning. What matters is what you do next. Sarah nodded, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill. She had spent so much of her life feeling like she was treading water, afraid to admit how much she wanted more. And now, here she was, on the edge of something that could finally give her the opportunity to change everything. As Elon made his way to the door, he turned back one last time. I'll check in with you soon, but remember, this is about you. Your dreams, your future. Take the leap when you're ready. You're not in this alone anymore. With that, he was gone. Sarah stood there for a long moment, staring at the door. She wasn't sure what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt like it was something she could shape. The weight of her struggles, the suffocating pressure of bills, and the constant worry about her future, all of it seemed just a little bit lighter now. With Elon's help, maybe she could finally break free. Maybe she could live a life where her potential wasn't limited by the financial constraints that had always held her back. But as Sarah sat down, trying to catch her breath, she realized something even more profound. This wasn't just about money or career advancement. This was about belief. For the first time in her life, someone powerful, someone successful, believed in her. And that belief? It felt like the spark of a fire that could change everything. The days following Elon Musk's visit were a blur. Sarah's thoughts raced in every direction, and despite the whirlwind of emotions, she couldn't seem to slow down. It felt surreal, like she had stepped into a different world, one where anything seemed possible. Her first meeting with the financial advisor was scheduled for the following week. She had never imagined that she would sit across from someone whose job it was to help her untangle her finances. Growing up, no one had ever taught her about managing money beyond basic budgeting. She had learned through trial and error, mostly error. So, the idea that she would finally have someone to guide her felt like a dream. But there was a part of her that was scared. Scared that this was too good to be true. Scared that she wouldn't be able to live up to the promise Elon had made. His belief in her had lit a spark, but sparks could be extinguished just as quickly as they were ignited. The night before her meeting with the financial advisor, Sarah lay in bed, tossing and turning. She tried to push the thoughts out of her head, the doubt, the fear, the what-ifs that clouded her every move. But they kept creeping back, whispering that maybe she wasn't cut out for this. Maybe she wasn't ready to change her life. But then she thought about Elon's words. You've got the heart and the drive to do something bigger. They echoed in her mind, a reminder that she wasn't in this alone. The next morning, Sarah woke up early, her stomach a bundle of nerves. She made her usual cup of coffee, trying to calm her racing thoughts. She had no idea what to expect from the financial advisor or what they would discuss, but she knew one thing for sure. This was her chance. It was her moment to take control of her future. She couldn't afford to waste it. She dressed quickly, choosing a simple but professional outfit. The idea of looking put together felt foreign to her. She had always focused more on surviving than thriving, but today felt different. Today, she was stepping into a new chapter. She just hoped she wasn't making a mistake by accepting help from someone like Elon. As she walked to the SpaceX building for the meeting, her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was a message from Elon. Hey Sarah, just checking in. Are you feeling ready for today? Remember, this is all about setting yourself up for success. No pressure. Sarah smiled at the message. It was comforting to know that someone believed in her, that someone was rooting for her. She typed a quick reply. Thanks, Elon. I think I'm ready. Nervous, but ready. The financial advisor's office was sleek, professional, and sterile. Everything she wasn't used to. It was the kind of place where deals were made, where futures were decided with a click of a button. Sarah felt out of place as she walked through the doors, but she held her head high. She wasn't going to let the intimidation of her surroundings stop her. The advisor, a woman named Rebecca, greeted her with a warm smile. She was in her early 40s, with short, dark hair and a calm demeanor that immediately put Sarah at ease. Hello, Sarah. It's nice to meet you, Rebecca said, extending her hand. I've been briefed on your situation, and I think we're going to be able to make a real difference here. Sarah shook her hand, still feeling a little overwhelmed. Thank you for meeting with me. I'm not really sure where to start. Don't worry. That's what I'm here for, Rebecca replied with a reassuring smile. Why don't we start by going over your current financial situation and then figure out a plan to help you get back on track? As Sarah sat down across from Rebecca, she opened her notebook and began to explain her finances in as much detail as she could. She talked about her student loans, the credit card debt that seemed to grow every month, and the anxiety she felt every time she checked her bank account. As she spoke, Rebecca took notes, occasionally asking clarifying questions, but for the most part, Sarah just talked. It felt good to be heard, to have someone understand the weight she had been carrying for so long. When she was finished, Rebecca looked up from her notes, her expression serious but not judgmental. Okay, Sarah, I know this may seem like a lot, but I can assure you, we can work through this, she said. The first thing we need to do is create a budget that actually works for you. That means setting priorities, cutting out unnecessary expenses, and making sure you're putting money towards savings and paying off debt. Sarah nodded, her stomach still in knots. It all seemed so complicated, but at least she had a roadmap now. Rebecca continued, we'll also work on setting up an emergency fund, something to fall back on in case things get tight. That way, you won't be in a position where you're stressing over unexpected expenses. The conversation continued, and Sarah found herself feeling a little lighter with every passing minute. By the end of the meeting, they had set clear financial goals. It was a lot to process, but for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she had control. When she left the office, she had a budget plan in hand and a sense of hope she hadn't felt in years. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't just surviving. She was moving towards something better. As Sarah walked back to her apartment, she pulled out her phone and saw a new message from Elon. How did it go? Sarah's fingers hovered over the screen for a moment, unsure of what to say. She didn't want to overstate things, but she also didn't want to downplay the significance of the meeting. It went really well, she typed. I feel like I finally have a plan. It's a little overwhelming, but I'm feeling hopeful. Elon's reply came almost instantly. Good. That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Keep going, Sarah. You've got this. She smiled at the words, feeling the weight of the last few days begin to lift. This was just the beginning. There was still so much to do, so many obstacles to overcome. But for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt like she was on the right path. A path that, just maybe, would lead to something bigger. Sarah's life had always been a balancing act, one she performed well, but never with much joy. It was always about juggling work, bills, and the constant pressure to prove herself. But now, something had shifted. With Elon's help and Rebecca's guidance, Sarah's financial situation, which had once seemed insurmountable, was now within her grasp. The possibility of a brighter future no longer felt like a distant dream. It felt real. As the weeks passed, Sarah's life slowly began to change. She followed the budget plan Rebecca had created, cutting out unnecessary expenses and starting to make small, yet significant, progress. For the first time in years, her bank account wasn't constantly in the red. She was learning to save and to prioritize, even when it felt difficult. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. And for Sarah, that was enough. But despite her newfound sense of control over her finances, something inside her still felt unsettled. She couldn't quite put her finger on it, but it was as if there was another piece of the puzzle she hadn't figured out yet. One night, after a long day of work, Sarah sat at her kitchen table, staring at the stack of papers in front of her. She was reviewing her budget, as usual, but her mind kept drifting. She thought about her job at SpaceX, the things she had learned, and the opportunities she had been given. But there was a nagging feeling that she wasn't fully living up to her potential. Her phone buzzed, interrupting her thoughts. It was a message from Elon. "How's everything going? I know we talked about a lot, but I want to hear how you're feeling about your progress." Sarah smiled at the message. It felt good to know that Elon was still thinking about her. Checking in, she typed a quick reply. "It's going well. I'm making progress with the budget, and I'm learning a lot. But I guess I'm still not sure what's next for me. I feel like I've gotten this part of my life under control, but I'm not sure what comes after that." Elon's reply was almost immediate. "That's exactly why I'm checking in. I think you've got more to offer than just managing your finances. You've got the skills and drive to do something bigger. You just need the opportunity." Sarah read the message twice. More to offer? Bigger opportunities? She had been so focused on managing her day-to-day life that she hadn't even considered the possibility of something larger, something beyond the grind. But now that Elon had said it, she couldn't stop thinking about it. She had always dreamed of being more than just an assistant, more than just someone managing schedules and answering emails. She wanted to be a part of something that mattered, something bigger than herself. But she had always held herself back, thinking that she wasn't qualified, that she wasn't enough. Now, Elon was telling her she was. Her phone buzzed again. "Let's set up a meeting," Elon wrote. "I think it's time we talked about what comes next for you. I've got an idea, but it starts with you taking a leap." Taking a leap. The words made her stomach flip. What leap? Where would it take her? The uncertainty felt overwhelming, but at the same time, there was something exciting about it. What if this was her chance to truly make a difference? What if, by following this advice, she could step into a future she had always dreamed of but never thought possible? The next morning, Sarah woke up early and dressed in her best, something that felt like it could belong to a new version of herself. She wasn't just going to meet Elon Musk. She was going to meet the opportunity of a lifetime. The meeting took place in one of SpaceX's conference rooms, with large windows that overlooked the bustling campus. The room felt surreal to Sarah, cold and clinical, but filled with potential. As she waited for Elon, she couldn't help but reflect on how far she had come. It hadn't been easy, but the changes in her life had already started to take root. This meeting, however, felt different. It felt like the first step towards something even bigger. Elon walked into the room with his usual easy confidence. He smiled when he saw her, and Sarah felt a flutter in her chest. "Good to see you, Sarah," Elon said, taking a seat across from her. "How are you feeling about everything?" "I'm good," Sarah replied, trying to steady her nerves. "I've made progress with the financial stuff, and it's honestly a relief to be in a better place. But I'm still not sure what comes next." Elon nodded thoughtfully. "I've been thinking about that, and I think you're ready for the next challenge." Sarah's heart raced. "Ready? For what?" I want to offer you an opportunity, Elon continued. Something that could not only change your life, but could also allow you to make an impact on a much larger scale. Sarah leaned forward, her curiosity piqued. What kind of opportunity? I've seen your potential, your work ethic, but I also see someone who is capable of leading, of taking on more than just a behind-the-scenes role. I want to offer you the chance to move into a leadership position here at SpaceX. Sarah's jaw dropped. A leadership position? Are you serious? Absolutely, Elon replied. I'm not offering this lightly, but I think you've got the skills, the drive, the passion. I want you to be a part of something bigger, something that could make a difference on a global scale. And I believe you're the right person to help lead that change. For a moment, Sarah couldn't find her words. She had spent so long doubting her ability to do more, to take on a bigger role. The idea of leading at SpaceX felt so far beyond her, yet Elon was offering it to her as if it were the most natural thing in the world. This is huge, Sarah finally managed to say, her voice trembling with both excitement and fear. But why me? Elon smiled, leaning back in his chair. Because I see the potential in you. I've seen what you can do when given the right support, and I know that with the right guidance, you can accomplish incredible things. You've already proven you're capable of taking on the hard work. Now it's time to take that next step. Sarah sat there, stunned. The leap that had seemed so terrifying only hours ago now felt like an opportunity too good to pass up. This was her chance to make a real impact, to lead, to be more than just an assistant. But could she really do it? As Elon stood to leave, he paused and looked at Sarah. Remember, the road less traveled is always the one that leads to the most growth. Are you ready to take it? She stared after him, the weight of his words settling in her chest. It was terrifying. It was unknown. But in that moment, Sarah knew one thing for sure. She was ready. The days after her meeting with Elon Musk were a blur of emotions, excitement, fear, uncertainty. Sarah's mind raced with thoughts of what this opportunity meant for her future. A leadership position at SpaceX? Her? It felt impossible, but then again, so much of the last few months had felt like something beyond her reach. And now, here she was, standing on the precipice of a new life. She spent the next few days contemplating her decision. It wasn't an easy choice. The role Elon was offering her was demanding, full of responsibility, high stakes, and the kind of pressure she had only observed from the sidelines. But it was also everything she had ever dreamed of, the chance to prove herself, to show what she was truly capable of. Sarah had always been the kind of person who played it safe, kept her head down, and did what was expected of her. She had never been one to take big risks, always worried that the fall would be too hard. But now, the stakes were higher. She couldn't afford to stay in her comfort zone anymore. If she wanted to make the change Elon saw in her, she would have to leap into the unknown. Her phone buzzed on the kitchen counter, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Elon. Have you thought about our conversation? It read. I know it's a lot to take in, but I want you to know that I'm here to support you no matter what. You've got this. She smiled at the message, feeling a wave of gratitude. It was rare to find someone who not only believed in you but was willing to offer tangible help to make it happen. Elon had done that for her. And now, it was up to her to decide if she was going to take that leap. Her decision came the next day. As soon as she stepped into the office at SpaceX, she asked to meet with Elon. She knew that her answer would change everything, and she needed to speak with him face to face. When Elon walked into the room, he looked at her with an expression of quiet anticipation. Sarah, he said, taking a seat. How are you feeling? I've been thinking a lot, Sarah began, her voice steady but unsure. This is a huge step, and I'm honestly a little scared. But I can't ignore the fact that this is the opportunity of a lifetime. I don't want to look back and wonder what could have been. Elon nodded, listening intently. I get it. It's a big move, and it requires a leap of faith. But I believe in you, Sarah. I know you're ready. The words, spoken with such conviction, were exactly what she needed to hear. They gave her the confidence to make her decision. I'm in, she said, surprising even herself with the certainty in her voice. I'm ready to take on the leadership role. I'm ready to step into the unknown. Elon's face broke into a smile. That's what I wanted to hear. "Welcome aboard, Sarah. I promise you won't regret this." As the words settled in, Sarah felt a rush of relief, excitement, and yes, fear. She had taken the leap, but now the real work would begin. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. Sarah was introduced to her new team, a group of talented individuals who had all been with SpaceX for years. They were eager to see what she would bring to the table, but Sarah could tell that they were also skeptical. After all, she was an outsider, someone who had been an assistant, not someone with years of experience in leadership. She wasn't naive enough to think it would be easy. The challenges were immense. There were decisions to be made, and each one felt like it could make or break the direction of a project. She had to quickly learn how to balance the technical details with the strategic oversight that came with being in charge. It was overwhelming, but it also felt invigorating. For the first time in her life, Sarah wasn't just reacting to the circumstances around her. She was shaping them. But even as she settled into her role, doubt lingered in the back of her mind. Was she really capable of leading? Was she qualified to make the decisions that would impact so many people's futures? One afternoon, as Sarah sat at her desk reviewing a presentation for an upcoming meeting, Elon stopped by. He knocked lightly on the doorframe and stepped inside. "How's it going?" he asked with a friendly smile. Sarah looked up, feeling a wave of exhaustion. "It's a lot. I'm not sure I'm doing this right." Elon raised an eyebrow, his expression thoughtful. "There's no one right way to do this, Sarah. The key is to keep learning, keep growing. You'll make mistakes, that's inevitable, but you'll also learn from them. And that's what counts." Sarah couldn't help but smile at his words. He made it sound so simple, even though she knew it wasn't. But she trusted him. She had to. He had already given her so much. Now, it was up to her to prove that she could handle this opportunity. "And don't forget," Elon continued, "you're not in this alone. You've got a team. They're here to support you." That was something Sarah had to remind herself of. She had spent so much time trying to prove herself that she forgot to lean on those around her. The people she was leading weren't just colleagues. They were her allies. They were just as invested in the mission as she was. Over the next few months, Sarah threw herself into her new role with everything she had. There were days when it felt like she was sinking, and there were nights when she lay awake wondering if she was doing enough. But there were also moments of triumph, when a project went well, when a decision she made proved to be the right one. Those moments were what kept her going, what reminded her that she was capable. And slowly but surely, the doubt that had once plagued her began to fade. It wasn't gone entirely. There would always be challenges, always be moments of uncertainty. But Sarah was learning to trust herself more, to trust the process, and to believe that she truly belonged in this new role. One evening, after a long day of meetings and strategy sessions, Sarah sat at her desk, reflecting on everything she had accomplished. She had come so far from the woman who once sat in a tiny apartment, unsure of her worth. Now, she was leading a team at one of the most innovative companies in the world. She thought back to the moment when Elon had first offered her the role. It had seemed impossible then, but now, it felt like the natural next step in her journey. She wasn't just managing her finances anymore. She was managing her future. And for the first time in a long time, Sarah felt truly in control. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah's role at SpaceX became more demanding, but also more fulfilling. Her initial fears of not being capable enough slowly faded away as she began to navigate the complexities of leadership. Every decision, every challenge, was an opportunity to grow, and Sarah seized them all with both hands. However, with growth came pressure. It was one thing to be given an opportunity. It was another to prove that you deserved it. Each project she led seemed to carry more weight, and with that weight came sleepless nights, stress, and moments of doubt. The stakes were higher now. She wasn't just managing her own career anymore. She was responsible for the success of a team, of an entire division within SpaceX. One particular project stood out: a highly ambitious mission to launch a new line of rockets that could revolutionize space exploration. The team had been working on it for months, and the timeline was tight. They were facing technical challenges, regulatory hurdles, and budget constraints that seemed insurmountable. Sarah's team was at a breaking point, and she felt the pressure mounting with each passing day. One morning, Sarah sat at her desk, staring at a new report from the engineering team. There was a serious issue with the rocket's propulsion system that could delay the entire project by months. She felt the weight of the problem pressing down on her chest. If they couldn't solve this issue, the entire mission would be jeopardized. She couldn't let that happen. Her phone buzzed with a new message. It was Elon. "Hey, Sarah. How are things going with the propulsion system? Anything I can do to help?" Sarah took a deep breath and typed back. "It's a huge problem, Elon. The engineering team is working around the clock, but I'm worried we're not going to meet the deadline. There's a lot on the line here." She hit send, hoping that he would understand the gravity of the situation. "Almost immediately," he replied. "I trust you to handle it, Sarah, but don't forget that you're not in this alone. If you need additional resources or advice, I'm here for you. Don't hesitate to ask." Those words hit Sarah harder than she expected. The pressure she had been feeling suddenly felt a little more bearable. Elon's support had always been a constant, but hearing it in such a direct and personal way made all the difference. She wasn't alone in this after all. The next few days were a blur of meetings, brainstorming sessions, and urgent phone calls with experts in propulsion systems. Sarah's team was working tirelessly, but progress was slow. She spent hours reviewing the design schematics, trying to find a solution, but nothing seemed to click. As much as she hated to admit it, they were running out of time. By the end of the week, Sarah knew they needed a breakthrough, something innovative, something bold. But what? That evening, as she sat alone in her office, she stared at the rocket design on her screen. Her mind was exhausted, her body sore, but she couldn't stop thinking about the problem. It felt like the solution was just out of reach, hovering on the edge of her mind. And then, in the quiet stillness of the room, it clicked. Sarah leaned forward, her heart pounding. It was a long shot, but it might just work. The propulsion system needed an overhaul, not a minor fix. They needed to change the way they were thinking about the problem entirely. She quickly scribbled down her ideas, then grabbed her phone and texted Elon. "I think I have an idea, but it's risky. I'd like to run it by you." Elon responded almost immediately. "Go for it. I trust your instincts, Sarah." That night, Sarah worked late into the evening, refining her concept. The more she thought about it, the more confident she became. It was a big risk, but sometimes, in order to innovate, you had to push boundaries. The next morning, she gathered her team for an emergency meeting. The room was filled with engineers, designers, and experts, all of them waiting for Sarah to lead them through the crisis. She could see the exhaustion in their eyes, but she also saw something else: hope. They were looking to her for direction, and she wasn't about to let them down. "I know we're all feeling the pressure," she began, her voice steady, "but I think I've come up with a solution. It's unconventional, but I believe it could solve the propulsion issue. We need to rethink the entire approach." The team fell silent, and Sarah could see the skepticism on their faces. But she had learned not to back down when it came to her ideas. She explained her concept in detail, laying out the potential risks and rewards. It was a bold move, but it was the only way forward. After what felt like an eternity of silence, one of the lead engineers, Brian, spoke up. "It's a long shot, but it's the kind of thinking we need. Let's do it." The team rallied behind her, and for the first time in weeks, Sarah felt a surge of hope. She had taken the leap again. Now, it was up to them to make it work. Days turned into weeks as the team worked tirelessly to implement Sarah's idea. There were setbacks, and there were moments when it felt like they were on the verge of failure. But Sarah refused to give up. She had made the choice to take risks, and she wasn't going to back down now. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the test flight was scheduled. It was time to see if the new propulsion system would work, or if their entire mission would come crashing down. As the rocket soared into the sky, Sarah held her breath, watching the live feed with her team. Everything had come down to this moment. Would it work? Would they succeed? And then, the rocket's engines roared to life, and Sarah's heart soared with it. The propulsion system was a success. The mission was back on track. The team erupted into cheers, and Sarah felt a rush of pride and relief flood through her. She had taken a massive risk, and it had paid off. This wasn't just her victory. It was the victory of the entire team, the culmination of their hard work and belief in each other. But for Sarah, it was more than that. It was a moment of realization. She had stepped into the unknown and come out on top. She had proven to herself that she was capable of leading, of making the tough decisions that would shape the future. As Elon called to congratulate her, Sarah couldn't help but smile. She had faced the challenge head-on, and she had come through stronger than ever. She had risen to the challenge, and she had no intention of stopping now. The success of the propulsion system felt like a turning point for Sarah. It wasn't just a technical win. It was the moment she proved to herself that she could handle the pressure of leading a project that could change the course of space exploration. The team's morale was at an all-time high, and for the first time in a long while, Sarah felt like she belonged. She wasn't just an assistant anymore. She was a leader, a problem solver. But with success came new challenges. The pressure from Elon and the board grew, as the stakes of the mission grew higher. With the propulsion system now working as planned, they were moving into the final stages of the rocket's development. The timeline was tight, the expectations were sky-high, and Sarah knew that one mistake could derail everything. Late one evening, as she reviewed the project's next phase, a message from Elon popped up on her phone. "Sarah, we need to talk. Can you come by my office tomorrow morning?" The words felt heavy, and a wave of anxiety washed over her. It was rare for Elon to call for a one-on-one meeting, especially when everything was seemingly on track. Was there a problem with the mission? Had something gone wrong? Despite her nerves, Sarah knew she couldn't put off the meeting. She had to face whatever came next, just as she had faced every other challenge since stepping into this role. The next morning, Sarah walked into Elon's office, her mind buzzing with questions. The walls were adorned with photos of past SpaceX missions, each one a reminder of the groundbreaking work that had come before. Elon was standing by the window, gazing out over the campus. He turned as she entered. "Hey, Sarah. Thanks for coming in. Have a seat." Sarah sat down, trying to read Elon's expression. He was calm, but there was an underlying tension in the air that she couldn't quite place. "What's going on, Elon?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Elon leaned against his desk, folding his arms. "I've been watching how you've handled everything. Your growth, the leadership, the way you've tackled problems head-on. I'm impressed, but I think you're at a tipping point. The next phase of this project is going to require a lot more from you." Sarah's heart raced. "What do you mean? I thought we were in the clear now that the propulsion system is working." "We are," Elon said, "but there's a new challenge that I think you'll be perfect for. There's a new initiative coming up at SpaceX, something bigger than what we've been working on, and I want you to lead it." Sarah blinked, stunned by the unexpected turn. "A new initiative? What kind of initiative?" Elon smiled slightly, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "We're talking about a new mission to Mars. It's still in the early planning stages, but I need someone who can take charge of the logistics, the strategy, and the team. Someone who can think big, see the entire picture, and navigate the political, financial, and technological aspects of a mission of this scale." The words hit Sarah like a freight train. A Mars mission? She had only heard rumors of SpaceX's plans to send humans to Mars, but she never thought she would be asked to lead it. It was the opportunity of a lifetime, the kind of challenge most people could only dream of. But was she ready? "You want me to lead a Mars mission?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes," Elon replied, his tone serious. "I believe you're ready. I wouldn't be asking if I didn't think you could handle it. You've already shown that you have the vision and the drive to make big things happen. Now, I want you to apply that to something that will change the world." Sarah felt the weight of his words. It was everything she had ever dreamed of, everything she had worked for. The chance to make an impact on a global scale, to be part of something that would shape the future of humanity. But the responsibility was enormous. Could she really pull it off? "I don't know if I can," she said, her voice faltering. "This is a huge step. There are so many variables, so many things that could go wrong." Elon leaned forward, locking eyes with her. "That's exactly why I'm choosing you. You don't shy away from the tough problems. You confront them head-on. That's the kind of leadership we need for a mission like this. It's not about being perfect. It's about being willing to take risks, learn from failures, and keep pushing forward." Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing. She had come so far, but this was unlike anything she had ever imagined. She had never even been to Mars. The scale of the mission, the pressure, the unknowns. It was terrifying. But as she looked at Elon, she saw something that she hadn't noticed before. A quiet confidence in her ability to succeed. It wasn't just that he believed in her. It was that he saw her potential in a way she had never fully seen herself. "I'll do it," Sarah said, her voice steady this time. "I'll lead the Mars mission." Elon's eyes sparkled with pride. "I knew you would. We'll start with a few planning meetings next week. You'll need to assemble a team, figure out the logistics, and get the ball rolling. I'll be here to help, but this is your project, Sarah. You're in charge." As the words settled in, Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline. It wasn't just the weight of the responsibility that hit her. It was the realization that she had reached the pinnacle of her career. This was her moment. Everything she had done, every struggle, every challenge, had led her to this point. She wasn't just an assistant anymore. She was a leader, and she was about to make history. As Sarah walked out of Elon's office, her heart was pounding in her chest. The magnitude of the task ahead of her was almost too much to process. A Mars mission? She had dreamed about this, but now that it was real, it felt like a whole new world was opening up before her. She could see the headlines now. Sarah Thompson leads SpaceX Mars mission. But it wasn't the headlines that mattered. It was the future she could help shape. She knew the road ahead would be filled with obstacles, doubt, and uncertainty. But it was also filled with an opportunity to do something that would leave a legacy, something bigger than herself. And she was ready. The weeks that followed Sarah's meeting with Elon felt like a blur of activity. The scope of the Mars mission was enormous, and she quickly realized just how much she had to do. It wasn't just about building a rocket or designing a landing module. It was about crafting the future of space exploration itself. The project would span years, require the best minds in science and engineering, and demand innovative thinking at every turn. Her first step was assembling a team. SpaceX had some of the brightest engineers and scientists in the world, but Sarah's task wasn't just to fill the team with experts. It was to build a cohesive unit capable of solving problems that no one had even encountered yet. She spent long hours in meetings with Elon, discussing the direction of the project. It was clear that Elon trusted her completely. He wasn't micromanaging, but instead giving her the space to make decisions and chart the course. For Sarah, this was both empowering and overwhelming. The weight of the responsibility settled on her shoulders like a heavy cloak, but there was no turning back now. She had to rise to the occasion. Her first big decision came when it was time to select the project leads for key areas: propulsion, life support, and habitat construction. These were not just technical tasks. They were the backbone of the entire mission. She needed people who could think outside the box and work under immense pressure. She needed a team that was capable of forging ahead into uncharted territory, literally and figuratively. After weeks of deliberation, Sarah selected a mix of SpaceX veterans and rising stars who had shown exceptional promise. She made sure to balance experience with fresh ideas, knowing that the mission would require both reliability and creativity. Her first meeting with the new team was nothing like she expected. She had envisioned a group of serious professionals, each bringing their expertise to the table. But what she found was something far more dynamic. A team of people who were just as eager as she was to be part of something historic, yet still grounded in the humbling reality of what they were trying to accomplish. The first meeting was held in one of SpaceX's state-of-the-art conference rooms, a sleek, high-tech space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the sprawling campus. Sarah stood at the front of the room, a flip chart behind her filled with notes and sketches. The team sat in a circle, their faces a mix of excitement, uncertainty, and curiosity. They were all here for one reason. They were about to try to do something no one had ever done before. "All right," Sarah began, her voice clear and strong. "We've been given the impossible: to send humans to Mars and ensure they can survive, thrive, and return safely. It's a monumental task, and it's going to take every ounce of innovation, determination, and teamwork we have. But I believe we can do it." She paused, letting the gravity of the statement sink in. Everyone in the room was listening intently. "I want to build a team that doesn't just solve problems. We create new ways of thinking. We'll take risks, and we'll fail sometimes. But that's part of the journey. Failure is a step toward success. We need to be willing to break the mold. Think beyond traditional solutions. This isn't just about getting to Mars. It's about ensuring humanity can survive and thrive there. We're not just building technology, we're building the future. The room was silent for a moment. Sarah could see the weight of her words settling in. This was more than just a mission. It was a vision, and she was leading it. One of the team leads, a veteran propulsion engineer named Marcus, spoke up first. "You know," he said, scratching his chin, "this is the kind of challenge I've been waiting for. We've built rockets, but sending a crew to Mars? That's next level. I'm in." Sarah smiled. "That's exactly what I want to hear. We're going to need people who are excited, who see the bigger picture. This isn't just about hitting deadlines. It's about doing something that will change everything." Another team member, Dr. Maria Lopez, who specialized in life support systems, leaned forward. "What kind of timeline are we looking at for the first launch?" Sarah met her gaze. "We're targeting a launch in 4 years, but that's flexible depending on how the tests go. We'll need to be adaptable. It's not just about hitting dates. It's about making sure every part of the mission is ready, every step of the way." The rest of the meeting was filled with technical discussions, planning sessions, and brainstorming. Sarah let the team take the reins on many of the details. After all, they were the experts. But as the conversation shifted from theory to reality, Sarah could feel the excitement building. The challenge ahead was enormous, but she also felt a sense of unity and purpose in the room. These people weren't just colleagues. They were a team, bound together by a common goal. As the weeks turned into months, the team worked tirelessly to bring the Mars mission to life. Sarah was constantly moving from one meeting to the next, checking in on progress, ensuring that every part of the project was moving forward. There were moments of doubt, times when it felt like they were inching forward at a snail's pace, but Sarah reminded herself that this was the nature of such an unprecedented endeavor. It wasn't going to happen overnight. One of the biggest challenges was the habitat design. The team had to create a space that would support human life for an extended period, in an environment that was hostile to everything Earthlings were accustomed to. The idea of creating a self-sustaining ecosystem on Mars was still in its infancy, and every design choice felt like a step into the unknown. In one of the late-night brainstorming sessions, Sarah found herself at the whiteboard with her lead architect, David, as they sketched out a modular habitat design. The idea was to create a structure that could be expanded upon as more resources were brought to Mars over time. "Do you think we're asking too much from the technology?" Sarah asked, drawing a line across the board to represent the habitat's expansion potential. "I mean, we're talking about sustainability over a long period, in an environment where nothing is guaranteed." David didn't hesitate. "We're asking a lot, but that's what makes it worth doing. If we can make this work, we'll be setting a precedent for all future missions. It's not just about Mars. It's about proving we can sustain human life on another planet. It's a huge leap forward for humanity." Sarah smiled. He was right. Every decision, every step they took, was a leap into the unknown. But that was the nature of innovation. It required risk, and it required vision. As the months went by, Sarah's leadership became more confident. She was no longer just managing a project. She was managing a dream. She wasn't just leading a team. She was leading the charge toward a future no one had ever imagined. Every success, every milestone, felt like a small victory in the long journey toward Mars. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. The real work had only just begun, and as she looked out over the SpaceX campus, she felt a deep sense of pride. She wasn't just the leader of a Mars mission. She was part of something far bigger than herself. She was part of the future. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The mission to Mars was no longer just a concept. It was real, an enormous, complex project that had become the heartbeat of SpaceX. Sarah had built her team, established the timeline, and set the course. But the closer they got to the first test launches, the more pressure mounted. Each day felt like a race against time. Engineers worked around the clock, constantly refining their designs. In parallel, Sarah had to keep the logistics moving forward. As the mission's leader, it was her responsibility not only to manage the project, but to ensure that it stayed on track despite every challenge. One particular hurdle began to haunt her thoughts: the funding. The scale of the mission was beyond anything SpaceX had undertaken before. A mission to Mars was not only costly, but it was also unpredictable. There was always the risk of unforeseen problems that could drain resources and delay the project. Every week, Sarah found herself in long meetings with Elon and the board members, discussing finances, timelines, and potential risks. The constant juggling act was starting to wear on her. There was always a question lingering in the back of her mind. What if something went wrong? The first test mission was drawing closer. They would send a probe to Mars, a precursor to the crewed mission, to test the landing systems and gather data on the Martian surface. It was a critical mission that would provide the team with invaluable insights, but it also had the potential to go horribly wrong. The launch window was coming up fast, and there was no room for error. One particularly tense afternoon, Sarah was sitting in her office reviewing some reports when her phone buzzed with a message from Elon. "Can you come by my office? We need to discuss the launch details." Her stomach churned. She had a feeling this wasn't going to be a casual conversation. She quickly stood up, grabbed her tablet, and made her way to Elon's office, her mind racing. When she arrived, Elon was already there, pacing in front of his desk. The moment she walked in, he looked up with a furrowed brow. "Sarah, we need to talk about the probe mission," he said, his voice tense. "There's been a new development. I just received some concerning news from the propulsion team. They've encountered a malfunction in one of the key systems. It could potentially delay the entire mission." Sarah felt her heart drop. "What do you mean, a malfunction? How serious is it?" Elon ran a hand through his hair. "It's not catastrophic, but it's critical enough that we can't risk launching unless we fix it. If we proceed without addressing this, there's a chance the probe could crash on Mars. That could delay everything. Our timeline, the crewed mission, all of it." For a moment, Sarah felt the weight of the situation press down on her. This wasn't just a technical issue. It was a pivotal moment for the entire mission. They were at a crossroads. "How long will it take to fix?" Sarah asked, her mind working to process the new information. Elon looked grim. "It could take weeks, but we might have a window for a quick fix. The real problem is how we present this to the board and investors. If we delay, it will cost us. We need to make a decision quickly." Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her thoughts. This wasn't just about the probe. It was about the future of the mission. She had worked tirelessly to bring everything to this point, and the stakes were higher than ever. "We need to do this right," she said finally, her voice steady but resolute. "I'll talk to the team. If the fix is feasible, we go ahead and make it. If not, we delay the launch and manage the fallout. But I won't risk everything for a short-term gain. We're not cutting corners on this mission." Elon studied her for a moment, and then his expression softened. "I knew I could count on you, Sarah. Let's make sure we're ready for whatever comes next. You're leading us through this, and I trust your judgment." Sarah nodded, grateful for his confidence, but feeling the immense weight of the responsibility. As she left Elon's office, she knew that the next few days would determine the future of the Mars mission. There was no room for mistakes now. Over the next few days, Sarah and her team worked around the clock to address the malfunction. It wasn't easy, but the engineers and technicians rallied together, pushing themselves to find a solution. There were moments of frustration and uncertainty, but Sarah kept the team focused, reminding them that this mission was bigger than any one failure. They had to think beyond the immediate crisis and keep their eyes on the long-term goal. Late one night, Sarah received a message from Marcus, the lead propulsion engineer. The system had been repaired, and the test would be ready to proceed as scheduled. Sarah felt a rush of relief wash over her, but it was quickly replaced with the sobering reminder that they still had to get through the launch itself. It wasn't over until the probe safely landed on Mars and transmitted its data back to Earth. The night of the test launch was nerve-wracking. Sarah stood in the control room, watching as the countdown clock ticked down to 0. Around her, engineers and scientists were glued to their screens, awaiting the moment of truth. Elon stood next to her, equally tense, his eyes fixed on the screens. "This is it," he said, his voice low. "We've come a long way." Sarah nodded, but she didn't speak. She was too focused on the mission, on the thousands of variables that could go wrong in the next few hours. The data they would receive from this test was critical for the success of the crewed mission, and she couldn't let anything derail it. The countdown reached 0, and the probe launched successfully. Everyone in the room exhaled, but there was still no time to relax. The real test would come when the probe reached Mars and attempted to land. Hours later, after a long period of tense silence, the first signs of success came through. The probe had entered Mars' atmosphere. The landing sequence had begun. For what felt like an eternity, Sarah watched as the data streamed in. Then, the words they had all been waiting for appeared on the screen. Landing successful. A cheer erupted in the control room. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The mission was still on track. They had made it through the first hurdle. Elon turned to her with a grin. "Well done, Sarah. You led us through this one." But Sarah only smiled briefly before turning back to the screen. This was a victory, but there was still much to do. The Mars mission was far from over. The success of the probe was only the beginning. The success of the probe mission was a breath of fresh air. It had been the validation the team needed, a clear indication that the Mars mission was indeed possible. Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment, but she knew that it was just a small step in a much larger journey. With the probe safely landing and transmitting valuable data, the pressure didn't ease, it only intensified. Now, the real work began. The crewed mission was still years away, but every decision from this point forward had the potential to make or break the success of humanity's first permanent settlement on Mars. Sarah spent countless hours in meetings, fielding questions from the board, discussing new technologies with her team, and facing the mounting expectations from investors and the public. She still found herself in long, late-night sessions with Elon, the two of them discussing the next phases of the mission. With every meeting, the scope of their work expanded. No longer was it just about getting humans to Mars. Now, they had to ensure that those humans could survive, that their habitat could be sustainable, and that they would return home safely. One late afternoon, Sarah found herself in a meeting with Dr. Maria Lopez, the head of the Life Support Systems team, and David, the lead architect for the Mars habitat. They were reviewing the latest designs for the living quarters that would house the astronauts on Mars. The habitat needed to be a self-sustaining environment, capable of producing food, recycling water, and maintaining oxygen levels, while also offering the astronauts comfort in an otherwise hostile environment. The room was filled with blueprints, diagrams, and 3D renderings of the proposed habitat. But there was something about the designs that still felt incomplete. Sarah could see the pressure weighing on Maria and David. "We've been at this for months, and we still don't have a perfect solution," David said, running his hand through his hair. "The systems are all working in theory, but we haven't done a real-world test with everything running simultaneously." Maria nodded in agreement. "It's the life support systems that have me worried. The idea of recycling air and water sounds good on paper, but there are too many variables that we can't fully simulate in a lab environment. If something fails, it could mean disaster for the crew." Sarah leaned forward, staring at the blueprint in front of her. "How do we test this?" she asked. Maria hesitated before responding. "We need a full-scale mock-up of the habitat, a place where we can simulate all the systems working together: air, water, food production, everything. But it would be expensive, and there's no guarantee we can test everything we need before launch." Sarah let the words sink in. She knew the risks. The budget was already stretched thin, and the mission was moving faster than ever before. A full-scale test would take months to set up, and there was no way to predict what could go wrong. But she also knew that cutting corners here could lead to a catastrophic failure. "We can't afford to guess," Sarah said, her voice steady. "I'll talk to Elon. We need to figure out how to make this happen. Safety and sustainability are our top priorities. We can't risk a situation where we aren't ready for the unknowns." Later that evening, Sarah found herself in Elon's office once again, explaining the situation. The weight of the decision was heavy on her shoulders as she outlined the necessity of a full-scale habitat test. "I agree with you, Sarah," Elon said, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "We need to test every aspect of the mission, and that includes the habitat. But as you know, we're working within constraints. We'll have to shift some resources around and see where we can make it work. If this is what's necessary to ensure success, then we'll find a way." Sarah nodded. "Thank you. I'll get started on the logistics right away." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of action. Sarah worked tirelessly with her team to organize the full-scale test. They found a location on Earth where they could build a replica of the Mars habitat and began gathering the materials needed to make the simulation as close to reality as possible. Despite the urgency, Sarah refused to let anyone cut corners. This was not just a test, it was the lifeline of the Mars mission. Every system had to work as planned, every failure had to be understood, and every risk had to be mitigated. She spent countless hours on site, overseeing the construction and ensuring that each system was calibrated precisely. There were setbacks, of course, technical glitches, supply chain delays, and unforeseen complications. But Sarah remained unflinching, leading her team through each challenge. It was the most stressful period of her career, but she couldn't afford to let fear or uncertainty take hold. She had a job to do, and she was determined to see it through. Finally, after months of preparation, the day arrived. The full-scale test was ready to begin. Sarah stood at the entrance of the habitat, her heart pounding. This was the moment when everything they had worked for would either fall into place or unravel before their eyes. The astronauts selected for the test were already inside, preparing to spend several weeks living and working in the habitat, simulating the experience of living on Mars. As Sarah looked around, she saw Elon standing by her side, his gaze fixed on the habitat. "You've done something incredible here, Sarah," he said quietly. "This is the kind of leadership that makes the impossible possible." Sarah smiled but didn't respond. She was too focused on the task ahead. There was no time for sentimentality now. The next several weeks were filled with anxious waiting. Sarah spent every moment in the command center, watching the data as it came in. Every minor failure was addressed immediately, and every success was a step closer to ensuring the viability of the mission. And then, one day, the unexpected happened. The life support systems, which had been operating at peak efficiency for weeks, suddenly experienced a malfunction. The oxygen production unit began to lose pressure, creating a potentially dangerous situation. Sarah's heart raced as she read the alert on her screen. She immediately contacted Maria and the team to assess the situation. There was no room for panic. They had prepared for every contingency. But the stress of the moment was palpable. For the next few hours, Sarah, Maria, and David worked together to troubleshoot the issue. It took time, but they eventually discovered that a faulty valve had caused the pressure drop. They replaced it and brought the system back online. When it was over, the team exhaled in relief. It had been a close call, but they had handled it as a team. Sarah knew that this experience would help them refine their systems and prepare for the inevitable challenges of the Mars mission. As the full-scale test came to a close, the team gathered together, reviewing the data and lessons learned. The habitat had passed the test, but Sarah knew they couldn't rest on their laurels. There was still much work to be done, and the clock was ticking. Looking out over the simulated Martian landscape they had built, Sarah felt a mix of exhaustion and pride. The journey was far from over, but they had taken another crucial step forward. They were closer than ever to making history. And as she looked ahead to the future, she knew that the real test, sending humans to Mars, was still to come. The months following the full-scale habitat test were some of the most intense Sarah had ever experienced. They had successfully averted a major crisis, but the lessons learned during the simulation had highlighted just how much more there was to do. The team was pushing forward, refining systems, improving designs, and making small but crucial adjustments to the Mars mission. The work was unrelenting, and Sarah's mind was constantly on the task at hand. Every aspect of the mission seemed to demand her attention: propulsion, life support, habitat construction, food production, and more. Each element was as critical as the next, and there was no room for mistakes. Sarah found herself juggling multiple projects at once, diving into technical details, attending endless meetings, and dealing with investors who were eager to see progress. The biggest challenge, however, was the development of the new rocket system, something that would carry astronauts safely to Mars and back. It needed to be fast, efficient, and capable of enduring the most extreme conditions in space. Elon had entrusted Sarah to lead the development of this key component, knowing that it was the lifeblood of the entire mission. One day, Sarah was in a meeting with the propulsion team, led by Marcus, when the conversation took a turn. The group had been working on an advanced fuel system for the rocket, designed to make the trip to Mars quicker and more cost-effective. but they had hit a stumbling block. Sarah, Marcus said, looking up from his notes, we've been testing this system for months, and we're still not getting the kind of efficiency we need. The propulsion system we have is solid, but it's not getting us the range we need. We're talking about a trip that could take up to 9 months each way. We need something that can push further, faster, and more reliably. Sarah leaned back in her chair, the weight of his words settling in. They were on the brink of a technological breakthrough, but they hadn't quite cracked the code yet. The team had been working tirelessly, but sometimes innovation required a leap of faith, a shift in thinking. Okay, she said, standing up and walking over to the whiteboard. What if we change the approach completely? We've been thinking about the problem in a linear way, focusing on incremental improvements to the current system. What if we look at this from a different angle? Instead of improving what we have, what if we challenge every assumption about space travel and propulsion? The team exchanged uncertain glances. It was a bold idea, one that would require rethinking the fundamentals of rocket science itself. But Sarah was convinced. They weren't going to get to Mars using the same methods they had used for years. They needed something radical. Let's think outside the box, she continued. We're aiming to send humans to Mars, not just send rockets into space. This is the future we're building. We need to innovate, not just optimize. For the next several weeks, Sarah and the propulsion team worked around the clock. They explored new fuel types, new propulsion systems, and new approaches to space travel that had never been attempted before. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when it felt like they were getting nowhere. But Sarah refused to let them quit. She kept pushing them to think bigger, to look beyond what had been done before. Then, one afternoon, Marcus walked into Sarah's office with a grin on his face. I think we've got it, he said, holding up a set of blueprints. We've designed a hybrid propulsion system that combines traditional rocket fuel with ion thrusters. It's more efficient, more powerful, and could cut the travel time to Mars by weeks. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. This was it, the breakthrough they had been waiting for. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was a significant step forward. How soon can we begin testing? She asked, already thinking ahead. Marcus smiled. We've already started preliminary tests. If all goes well, we'll be ready to integrate this into the launch system in a few months. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. This propulsion system could revolutionize space travel and, more importantly, it could be the key to getting astronauts to Mars faster and more safely than anyone had ever imagined. They were on the verge of a new era in space exploration. As the propulsion system testing continued, the rest of the team was also making tremendous progress. The life support systems had been further refined, and the habitat's structural integrity had been rigorously tested. The food production systems, another key component of the Mars mission, had successfully completed multiple simulations, proving that it was possible to grow crops in Martian-like conditions. The only remaining challenge was the spacecraft itself. The design had evolved, but there were still questions about its long-term durability. Could it withstand the extreme temperatures of space? Would it protect astronauts from radiation? Could it function reliably for years without significant maintenance? Sarah knew the spacecraft had to be perfect. It would be the vessel that carried humanity to Mars, and it had to withstand the unknowns of space travel. She spent hours with the engineering team, going over every detail, from the heat shields to the life support systems to the cockpit designs. Nothing could be overlooked. One morning, Sarah was walking through the launch facility when she was approached by Elon. He looked uncharacteristically serious, his brow furrowed as he walked alongside her. Sarah, he began, his voice calm but with an edge of urgency. I've been getting pressure from some of our investors. They want to see more concrete progress, more assurances that we're going to meet our deadlines. There are some concerns that we're pushing too hard with the innovation. They want to see more traditional approaches, more tried-and-true methods. Sarah's stomach tightened. She knew exactly what this meant. The investors were growing impatient, and their pressure could mean cuts to the budget, delays, or worse, pulling support for the entire mission. I understand, Elon, Sarah said, her voice steady but firm. But this mission isn't just about getting to Mars. It's about doing it in a way that sets humanity up for success in the long run. If we settle for conventional solutions, we're not making history. We're just following in the footsteps of what's been done before. Elon stopped and turned to face her. I know, Sarah, and I agree. but we're dealing with some heavy financial stakes here. We can't afford to fail." Sarah nodded, feeling the weight of the situation settle in. The pressure to succeed had never been higher. She had come too far to back down now. "I'll make sure we stay on track, Elon," she promised. "I'll handle it. We won't settle. But I need your support to keep pushing forward. Innovation is the only way we're going to make this happen. We have to trust the process." Elon studied her for a moment before nodding slowly. "All right, Sarah. I trust you. You've proven yourself more than once. Keep going. Just make sure we're keeping our investors in the loop. They need to know we're moving in the right direction." As Sarah returned to her team, the sense of urgency only intensified. Every step forward, every innovation, came with its own set of risks. But she knew that the future of humanity wasn't about playing it safe. It was about pushing boundaries, embracing uncertainty, and trusting in the team that had come together to make the impossible a reality. The mission to Mars wasn't just a project. It was the next chapter in human history, and Sarah was leading the charge. The launch window was growing ever closer, and the weight of it all hung heavily on Sarah's shoulders. The pressure, the scrutiny, the stakes, they were more than just personal now. The mission to Mars was no longer just about innovation or pushing the boundaries of technology. It had become a symbol of what humanity could achieve if they dared to dream big enough. In the months since the breakthrough with the new hybrid propulsion system, progress had been swift. The spacecraft was coming together, the life support systems were nearing perfection, and the habitat tests were yielding promising results. But there was still something haunting Sarah, a lingering feeling that something could go wrong, something big. Late one night, as she walked through the bustling SpaceX headquarters, Sarah found herself standing in front of the prototype of the Mars-bound spacecraft. The gleaming metal hull reflected the overhead lights as she took in its imposing, sleek form. It was hard to believe that it had all started as just an idea, a dream that had once seemed impossible. Yet here it was, ready for its first full-scale test. She couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as she stood there, staring up at it. But with that awe came the heavy burden of responsibility. This wasn't just a rocket, it was a lifeline. For the astronauts who would one day board it, this craft would be their home for months, perhaps years. It would carry them across the void of space, into the unknown. A small, anxious voice inside her whispered, "What if something goes wrong?" "Everything will be fine," Sarah muttered to herself, shaking off the doubts. She had done everything in her power to ensure that the spacecraft would succeed. Her team had worked tirelessly. She had poured her heart and soul into this project. They had pushed the boundaries of what was thought possible. And yet, as she stood alone in front of the spacecraft, that quiet fear remained. The next morning, Elon called an impromptu meeting. Sarah and the key members of her team gathered in the large conference room, a sense of anticipation in the air. Elon stood at the front, his eyes scanning the room. "We're ready for the final test," he said, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "This is it. Everything we've worked for comes down to this moment. I need all of you to be prepared for the final stretch. If we succeed here, we go live. If we fail—" He trailed off, letting the weight of the words hang in the air. Sarah looked around the room at her colleagues. Each one of them had given everything for this mission. They had overcome countless obstacles, and now they were about to embark on the most critical test of all. Their resolve was unshakable. "Elon," Sarah spoke up, breaking the silence, "we've come a long way, but this test won't be easy. It's the final hurdle before we send humans to Mars. We need to make sure everything is ready, from the propulsion to the life support systems. Every single element must be tested in real conditions. This can't be rushed." Elon nodded, acknowledging the truth of her words. "I trust you, Sarah. You've been leading us through every challenge. I know you won't let us down." With that, the team got to work. The test day arrived, and Sarah found herself once again in the control room, surrounded by engineers, scientists, and astronauts who would be part of the final trial. The spacecraft was on the launch pad, its engines primed, ready for a full-scale systems check. The test would simulate a full mission scenario, launch, travel, and re-entry, but without the astronauts aboard. This would be the ultimate test of the spacecraft's integrity and reliability. Sarah stood with her arms crossed, her eyes fixed on the screens in front of her. Every detail of the mission had been accounted for, but that same quiet fear gnawed at her. She couldn't shake the thought that this test, this moment, was the one that would either confirm the mission's viability or expose a fatal flaw. The countdown began. T-minus 10 minutes. Each second felt like an eternity as Sarah's mind raced through every aspect of the spacecraft's design, every test result, every success, and every failure. She couldn't afford to miss anything. T-minus 5 minutes. She glanced around the room. Everyone was focused, but there was a subtle tension in the air. It was palpable. Sarah knew that they were all thinking the same thing. What if this test didn't go as planned? What if it failed? What would that mean for the future of the mission? For the astronauts they were preparing to send? T-minus 1 minute. Sarah's breath hitched as the final moments ticked down. There was no turning back now. This test would either confirm that the spacecraft was ready for Mars, or it would send them back to square one. And then, at the moment the clock hit 0, the spacecraft's engines roared to life. For a moment, everything seemed to hold still. The noise, the pressure, the heat. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She could feel the intensity of the moment, the weight of the thousands of eyes watching, waiting. This was the culmination of years of work. The rocket lifted off, climbing higher and higher into the sky, its engines burning bright. The spacecraft shot upward, cutting through the clouds, accelerating toward space. The team watched in silence as the data streams poured in, monitoring every aspect of the flight. The propulsion system worked flawlessly. The life support systems were stable. The pressure, temperature, and oxygen levels were all within optimal ranges. For the first time in months, Sarah allowed herself to exhale. The spacecraft was performing exactly as it should. Hours later, as the test neared its conclusion, the spacecraft re-entered Earth's atmosphere and executed a flawless landing. The data confirmed it. The spacecraft was ready. The room erupted into applause, but Sarah remained quiet. She stood there, absorbing the moment. The mission wasn't over. It had just begun. Later that evening, as Sarah walked out of the facility, her mind still racing, Elon caught up with her. His eyes were shining with excitement, but there was a weight in his gaze. "You did it, Sarah," he said, a rare smile on his face. "This is a huge step forward. We're one test away from making history." Sarah nodded, but the fatigue of the day was catching up with her. "We've come a long way, but this is just the beginning. There's still so much to do. We've proven the spacecraft can do its job, but now we need to make sure the crew is ready, the technology is flawless, and the mission plan is airtight." Elon placed a hand on her shoulder. "And we will. We have you leading us. I couldn't be prouder." Sarah smiled faintly. "There's still a lot of work to do, but I believe we're on the right track. It's just going to take everything we've got to get it right." As she looked up at the sky, a thought crossed her mind. What if they succeed? What if they actually get to Mars and set up a new home for humanity? What if all of this, the sweat, the stress, the sacrifice, was worth it? There was still so much uncertainty ahead, but one thing was clear. They were closer than ever to making the impossible possible. With the successful test flight behind them, the momentum for the Mars mission was unstoppable. Sarah could feel the buzz of anticipation everywhere she went. At SpaceX headquarters, in the media, and within the ranks of the team. The spacecraft had proven its worth, and now the world was watching. But the pressure had only intensified. The next few months would be the most crucial. The team was on the verge of something that could change the course of history, an actual mission to Mars. Every part of the project was now under the microscope. From the spacecraft's operational systems to the psychological preparation of the crew, there were no shortcuts to perfection. Sarah sat at her desk, scrolling through the latest reports. It was late in the evening, the office mostly empty except for a few engineers still hard at work. Her phone buzzed with a message from Elon. "We need to talk about the crew selection. Meet me in the conference room in 10. She felt a knot form in her stomach. The crew was perhaps the most important decision of all. The astronauts chosen to embark on the Mars mission wouldn't just be pioneers of science and technology, they would be the first to make the unimaginable a reality. 10 minutes later, Sarah walked into the conference room, where Elon was waiting with a few key members of the leadership team. The atmosphere was thick with the weight of the decision. Elon motioned for her to sit. Sarah, he began, his expression serious. This is the point where we really separate the dreamers from the doers. The crew we select will have to live on Mars for months, possibly years. We're talking about unprecedented isolation, immense pressure, and constant danger. They need to be more than just astronauts. They need to be resilient, adaptable, and capable of handling anything that comes their way. Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of the decision. The mission wasn't just about science. It was about human endurance, teamwork, and overcoming the unknown. We've narrowed it down, Elon continued, sliding a list of names across the table. But I want your input. We need a team that can handle the technical challenges, but also the emotional and psychological strains of long-term space travel. This isn't just about expertise. It's about personality and character. Sarah looked at the names, feeling the weight of the moment. The crew needed to be strong, not just for the mission, but for each other. They needed to be capable of living together in the confined quarters of a spacecraft for an extended period, far from Earth, far from civilization. One name on the list caught her eye, Commander Jessica Harris. Jessica was a veteran astronaut who had led multiple space missions, including a successful stay aboard the International Space Station. Her experience was unparalleled, but Sarah knew that what set Jessica apart wasn't just her technical skills. It was her ability to lead a team under pressure, to keep her cool when the situation grew dire. Jessica Harris, Sarah said, tapping the name. She's been through the toughest situations imaginable. If anyone can handle Mars, it's her. Elon nodded. Agreed. She's on the list. But what about the rest of the team? We need to think about diversity in skills, backgrounds, and perspectives. This team will have to rely on each other in ways we can't even imagine yet. Sarah scanned the list again. She knew that balancing experience with the right mix of skills was essential. There had to be engineers, scientists, medical personnel, the full spectrum of expertise needed for a mission of this magnitude. And they had to be more than just specialists. They had to be adaptable. For the next hour, the team discussed each candidate in detail, weighing their strengths and potential weaknesses. The selection process was grueling, but by the end, they had their crew. Commander Jessica Harris, Dr. Rafael Mendoza, a biologist specializing in extremophiles, Dr. Mina Lee, a geologist and space medicine expert, and Jack Carter, a mechanical engineer with an unshakable calm in crisis situations. It was a team that had the technical expertise to tackle the unknowns of Mars, but also the mental fortitude to withstand the rigors of space travel. As the meeting concluded, Sarah felt a sense of relief wash over her. The team was assembled, and the mission was one step closer to becoming a reality. But she knew the hardest part was still ahead. The crew would now undergo months of rigorous training and psychological evaluations. They would have to prove they could function as a unit in the most extreme conditions. There would be no margin for error. Sarah walked out of the conference room, her mind racing with thoughts of the mission. She had poured everything into this project, but now, as the crew selection process was complete, the responsibility weighed heavier than ever. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. The world was watching. The future of humanity was riding on the success of the mission. But amidst all the preparation, there was a moment of pause, an unexpected call that took Sarah off guard. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from Elon. "Sarah," he said when she answered, "we need to talk about the financials. There's been some pushback from investors again. They're concerned about the cost of training the crew in the upcoming mission phase. They're asking for a more detailed budget breakdown." Sarah's stomach tightened. She had anticipated some level of financial scrutiny, but this was different. Elon's voice was tight with concern, and she could tell this wasn't a simple request. "I'll take care of it," Sarah replied, trying to keep her tone steady. "I'll get the numbers to them and make sure they understand why every dollar we're spending is necessary. This mission isn't just about sending a crew to Mars. It's about laying the foundation for humanity's future in space." "I trust you, Sarah," Elon said, before adding, "but remember, this is bigger than any one of us. We can't afford to let anything slip through the cracks now." The weight of his words lingered as she hung up the phone. The mission was moving forward, but so were the challenges, financial, technical, and emotional. Every step felt like crossing a line into the unknown, and there would be no turning back. Days turned into weeks, and the intense preparations continued. Sarah found herself spending more time in meetings with investors, walking them through the costs, outlining the long-term return on investment. She worked with the crew, overseeing their training and simulations, ensuring that every detail was covered. But no matter how much she worked, she couldn't shake the growing pressure. The closer they got to the launch window, the harder it became to balance the demands of the project with her own sense of self. She was no longer just a part of a team. She was the leader, and that meant carrying a responsibility far beyond the mission itself. Late one evening, after a long day of meetings and training exercises, Sarah sat alone in her office, staring out at the city lights below. The weight of it all was overwhelming. She was about to cross the final threshold, into the unknown. She could feel the eyes of the world on her team, on the mission. What if it fails? The thought gnawed at her, but she pushed it aside. They had come too far to turn back now. The mission wasn't just about making history. It was about forging a future for humanity. And for that, they would have to cross the line. As the days melted into weeks, the reality of what was coming next became all too clear. The Mars mission, once an abstract idea that Sarah had passionately dreamed about, was now on the cusp of becoming a reality. Every aspect of the project was inching closer to its climax. Every detail was meticulously scrutinized. The clock was ticking down, and the pressure had never been more palpable. The crew had completed the majority of their training, and while the technical aspects were near flawless, there was a new challenge looming over them all: mental preparation. The psychological demands of space travel, particularly a journey to Mars, could not be underestimated. It wasn't just the technical training. It was the emotional toll of leaving Earth, of facing the unknown. Sarah knew that some of her crew members, no matter how skilled they were, would face moments of doubt, loneliness, or anxiety. They would have to be ready for isolation and uncertainty on a scale that most humans could not comprehend. Early one morning, after a long night spent reviewing mission protocols, Sarah found herself in the training center, watching the crew undergo their final psychological simulations. It was a series of immersive, simulated experiences designed to test the crew's resilience under extreme stress. The goal was to ensure they could handle any crisis that might arise, from life support failures to conflicts within the team. Jessica Harris, the commander, stood at the center of the room, issuing orders with a calm but firm voice. Her demeanor was exactly what Sarah had hoped for: a natural leader, unflappable in the face of uncertainty. Yet, as Sarah observed her, she noticed a small but significant tremor in Jessica's hands as she adjusted her headset. Was it the pressure? The nerves? Or the realization that they were now just one step away from embarking on the most dangerous journey humanity had ever attempted? Later that day, Sarah called Jessica into her office for a one-on-one conversation. She needed to gauge the commander's readiness, to ensure that the emotional and mental weight of the mission wouldn't be too much to bear. Jessica walked in, sitting down across from Sarah, her usual composure intact. But there was a glint of vulnerability in her eyes that hadn't been there before. "How are you feeling, Jessica?" Sarah asked, leaning forward. The commander paused, then exhaled deeply. "It's starting to hit me," she admitted. "The magnitude of it all. Not just the mission, but the human element. We're about to leave everything behind. Families, friends, everything we know. And we're going to Mars, with no guarantee that we'll come back." Sarah nodded. "I understand. I think we all feel it, in one way or another. But this is why we've spent so much time preparing, physically and mentally. You're ready for this, Jessica. You've handled so much already. You've been through far worse than anything we might face out there." Jessica smiled faintly. "Maybe, but this is different. This isn't like being in a station in orbit, or even a shuttle. Mars isn't just another mission. It's the frontier. And we're the ones leading the charge." There was a long silence as Sarah thought about Jessica's words. She had always respected the commander, but now, hearing this unspoken fear, she realized that even the strongest among them had their doubts. "You're right," Sarah said quietly, "but I believe in you. I believe in all of you. We've prepared for every possible scenario. We've run the simulations. And the fact that you're feeling this way just proves you're human. That's why you'll make the right choices, when it matters." Jessica leaned back, her hands resting on the table. Thanks, Sarah. I needed to hear that. The days that followed were a blur of last-minute adjustments and fine-tuning. The spacecraft was ready for launch. The crew was physically prepared, and their mental conditioning was nearing its peak. There were still moments of tension, moments when doubt threatened to creep in, but Sarah was determined to push through. The final countdown had begun. In the control room, the atmosphere was tense. The team had been working around the clock, double-checking every system, reviewing all protocols. There was no room for error. The spacecraft, now standing tall on the launch pad, was the culmination of years of planning, engineering, and testing. Everything had to go perfectly. Sarah stood by the observation window, her arms crossed, watching as the crew suited up in their mission-ready gear. They looked every bit the part of space explorers, but Sarah could see the tension in their eyes. The weight of history was on their shoulders. "Are you ready?" Elon's voice cut through her thoughts. She turned to face him. His usual confident, almost playful demeanor had been replaced with something more serious, more reflective. "I'm ready," she replied, though she wasn't entirely sure if that was the truth. "We all are," Elon said. "You've done something incredible here, Sarah. There's no turning back now." The final moments before launch felt like a dream, surreal and impossible. The countdown continued, ticking away with unrelenting precision. T-minus 10 minutes. The voice over the loudspeaker echoed through the launch facility. Sarah's heart raced. She could feel the tension building, the collective breath of everyone in the room held in anticipation. Her mind raced through everything they had accomplished, every obstacle they had overcome to get to this point. The crew was strapped in. The final checks were complete. The systems were green across the board. 5 minutes. The finality of the countdown seemed to permeate the entire facility. Sarah's eyes remained fixed on the spacecraft. It was hard to believe that it was finally time. After everything they had been through, every trial, every test, every failure and success, it all led up to this. And yet, there was something inside her that still hesitated. The unknowns, the risks, the potential dangers, they were real. There was no going back after this, but she also knew that they couldn't let fear stop them. Fear was what had held humanity back for centuries. Now, they were about to break free from that fear. T-minus 1 minute. The countdown was almost over. Sarah took a deep breath, glancing over at Elon. His expression was unreadable, but she knew he was feeling the same pressure, the same anticipation. The final second was drawing near. 10, 9, 8, 7. It was happening. It was really happening. 3, 2, 1. Ignition. The rocket engines roared to life, shaking the ground beneath their feet. The spacecraft began its ascent, climbing steadily into the sky. As Sarah watched the rocket climb, her heart raced, but she couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. This was it. They were on their way. They had crossed the line. The future of humanity was taking flight. The rocket continued its ascent, piercing the atmosphere with a power and grace that only years of careful planning could yield. Sarah stood in the observation room, her eyes fixed on the launch as it disappeared into the sky. A strange mix of awe and anxiety filled her chest. The Mars mission was no longer a dream or a plan. It was happening. But there was no turning back now. The spacecraft had cleared the Earth's atmosphere and entered the void of space. The journey to Mars would take months, and Sarah's role as mission director didn't stop once they left Earth's orbit. There was still so much to manage, so much to oversee. But for now, she allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. The mission was underway. Inside the spacecraft, the crew had begun their journey. The artificial gravity system was stabilizing, and the hum of the machinery was a constant, comforting sound. For now, everything seemed in order. But Sarah knew all too well that the real challenges lay ahead. The team was in the early stages of a long journey that would test them in ways they had never imagined. Commander Jessica Harris, Dr. Rafael Mendoza, Dr. Mina Lee, and Jack Carter were on board, 4 brave souls, each a specialist in their field, each essential to the mission's success. But it was more than just technical expertise that made them the perfect team. It was their adaptability, their mental fortitude, and their deep trust in one another. Sarah was still in constant communication with the spacecraft, monitoring every aspect of the journey. The first few days were crucial, ensuring that the spacecraft's systems functioned as intended, confirming that the crew's health and morale remained stable, and keeping a close eye on the psychological evaluations. As much as she believed in their abilities, she knew the isolation would soon take its toll. "Sarah, we're all good here," Jessica's voice crackled through the communication system. "The crew's adjusting well. The systems are holding up." Sarah let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "Glad to hear it, Jessica. Just remember, we're in constant contact. If you need anything at all, don't hesitate to reach out." "Of course. We've trained for this." As the days passed, Sarah's life became a blur of check-ins, updates, and ongoing tasks. She kept herself busy with the logistics of the mission, constantly working to ensure that everything on Earth was in sync with the spacecraft. The world was watching, and so much rested on the success of this mission. The pressure was unrelenting. But amid all of her responsibilities, there was one thought that refused to leave her mind. What if something goes wrong? The risks were enormous. The potential for failure was high. They were about to attempt something that humanity had only dreamed about for centuries, reaching Mars, and yet, so much could go wrong along the way. Space was unforgiving. There were variables no one could anticipate, dangers that couldn't be predicted. One evening, as Sarah sat at her desk, her phone buzzed with an incoming message. It was a report from the spacecraft, but there was something unsettling about it. The message was from Dr. Mina Lee, the mission's medical officer and space medicine expert. "Sarah, we need to talk. There's something you should know." A wave of unease washed over Sarah as she read the message. She immediately picked up the phone and dialed Mina's number. "Mina," Sarah said, her voice tight with concern. "What's going on? What happened?" There was a brief silence on the other end of the line before Mina's voice came through. It was calm, but Sarah could hear the underlying tension. "Sarah, it's Jack," Mina began. "He's been experiencing some symptoms. I'm concerned about the effects of prolonged spaceflight on his body. There's been some unusual fatigue and signs of early-stage bone density loss. I don't want to alarm you, but it's something we need to address immediately." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She had known about the risks of space travel, but this was different. The psychological and physiological effects of long-duration space travel were well documented, but they had hoped the team would be able to avoid such issues. Jack had been one of the strongest candidates, both physically and mentally. "How serious is it?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's hard to say right now," Mina replied. "We're running some tests, but I wanted to let you know as soon as possible. We're monitoring him closely, and I think we can manage it for now, but we'll need to keep a close eye on his condition." Sarah's mind raced. If Jack's health deteriorated further, it would jeopardize the entire mission. He was integral to the mission's success. His expertise in mechanical engineering was critical for any potential repairs or emergencies that might arise. But if he couldn't perform his duties, there was no backup. "I understand, Mina," Sarah said. "Keep me updated, and make sure you take every precaution. If there's any chance of a setback, we need to know." As Sarah ended the call, a feeling of dread settled over her. This was the beginning of the long, uncertain stretch of space travel, and it wasn't going to be easy. She knew the crew had been trained for this, but that didn't make the reality any less terrifying. She stared out at the stars from her office window. It was almost poetic, the vastness of space, the isolation of it all. They were embarking on the most incredible journey, but with each passing minute, the risks multiplied. What would happen if they couldn't make it to Mars? The thought gnawed at her, but she quickly pushed it aside. They couldn't afford to dwell on the risks. They had to focus on the mission, on the next step. Meanwhile, aboard the spacecraft, the crew continued to settle into their routine. The reality of space travel was becoming more apparent every day. Despite the excitement and the initial thrill of being the first to leave Earth's orbit, the weight of the journey was beginning to settle in. Jack's condition was being monitored closely, and the crew did their best to continue with their training and responsibilities. But the tension among them was undeniable. Every action, every decision, carried more weight than ever before. Jessica, ever the leader, made a point to gather the crew together for regular team meetings, ensuring they remained united and focused. But the isolation, The uncertainty of the unknown was starting to take its toll on everyone. Sarah sat back in her chair, her mind still racing with the new development. The mission was now at the mercy of forces beyond their control. Jack's health was just one of many unpredictable factors in this unprecedented journey. But one thing was clear: the stakes had never been higher. The days turned into weeks, and the vast emptiness of space seemed to stretch out endlessly before them. The spacecraft, a beacon of human achievement, now felt more like a fragile capsule suspended in the void. Each passing day brought new challenges: physiological, psychological, and logistical. The crew had entered a phase that was no longer about excitement or awe. It was about survival, endurance, and the slow grind of space travel. Back on Earth, Sarah's nerves were frayed. Jack's condition had worsened. The bone density loss that Mina had mentioned was becoming more severe, and the fatigue he had been experiencing turned into an almost debilitating weakness. His ability to perform his duties was rapidly diminishing, and Mina had suggested that they consider rotating him out for a medical evaluation. But there was no one to replace him. Sarah sat at her desk late one night, staring at the screen in front of her. The reports from the spacecraft filled her inbox, each one more concerning than the last. There were technical malfunctions, nothing major, but enough to remind her that even the smallest mistake could be catastrophic. She had no choice but to send a message to Elon. It was a message she never wanted to send. "Elon, we've got a serious issue. Jack's condition is worsening. I don't know how much longer he can stay in the mission. We need to figure out what to do." She hit send and leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling. The weight of responsibility pressed down on her. It was supposed to be a historic moment, a triumph of human spirit and ingenuity. But now, everything was hanging by a thread. Hours later, Elon's response came through. "Sarah, I understand. We're exploring every option here. We'll have to act fast. You're doing an incredible job, but this is a delicate situation. Let's schedule a video call in the morning to discuss." "Hang in there." Sarah let out a sigh of relief. At least she wasn't facing this alone. But she knew that the decision they were about to make could alter the entire course of the mission. There was no guarantee they could make it to Mars with one crew member incapacitated, and sending Jack back to Earth wasn't an option. The next day, Elon joined Sarah for a video call. His expression was serious, the weight of the situation clear in his eyes. "Sarah, I've been looking at the options. We've got a few possibilities, but nothing is perfect," Elon began, his voice low. "If we continue with Jack on board, we risk the entire mission. But if we rotate him out, we may lose the critical expertise he brings to the team. We can't afford to make the wrong decision." Sarah nodded, feeling the burden of the decision bearing down on her. "What do you think we should do?" "I wish there were an easy answer," Elon admitted. "But I trust you to make the call. You've been the one making the tough decisions all along. Just know this: whatever we decide, we're in this together. You're not alone." The decision was clear, but it was one that weighed heavily on Sarah's heart. The mission couldn't afford to lose Jack, but his deteriorating health was undeniable. There was no easy fix. After another round of consultations with the medical team, they decided that Jack would remain on board, but under strict medical supervision. They would monitor his condition closely and make necessary adjustments. It was the only viable option, but it came with immense risk. For the crew aboard the spacecraft, the news was unsettling. Jessica, the ever-strong leader, took it in stride, but Sarah could see the tension in her eyes. Mina and Raphael were equally concerned. The long duration of space travel was testing their limits, and Jack's condition added yet another layer of uncertainty to an already fragile situation. A week later, the situation began to unravel. Jack's condition had deteriorated further, and he was unable to perform even basic tasks. The crew members began to feel the weight of his absence more keenly. They were no longer just a team of experts working together on a mission. They were becoming a team of survivors, struggling to adapt to an environment where every second mattered. Jessica called an emergency meeting in the spacecraft's common area. She needed to keep the crew focused, to remind them why they were there and what they had been trained for. But when she stood up to speak, her voice trembled slightly. "I know things are tough right now," she began, her eyes scanning the crew. "But we've trained for this. Every one of us is here because we're the best of the best. We can't let what's happening with Jack distract us. We have a mission, and that mission is to get to Mars. Raphael, who had been unusually quiet, spoke up. It's not just about the mission, Jessica. We can't ignore the reality of what's happening. Jack isn't just a colleague. We're a family. This is hard on all of us. Mina nodded. Raphael's right. We need to make sure we're supporting each other, not just as a team, but as people. If we don't stay united, we won't make it. Sarah, who had been listening quietly in the corner of the room, felt the truth in their words. The psychological toll of space travel had begun to settle in. It wasn't just about technical failures or physical limitations. It was about the strain on their minds, their spirits, and their bonds as a crew. The next few days were some of the most trying for the crew. Jack's condition reached a critical point, and there were moments when it seemed as though the mission might have to be abandoned entirely. Sarah found herself having to make decisions she never thought she would face. She considered rotating Jack out, but how would that even work when there were no options to bring him back safely to Earth? And what would that do to the morale of the team? But the mission couldn't stop. There were still millions of people watching, hoping, waiting. The whole world had invested in this dream, and the pressure mounted with each passing day. Then, in the midst of the chaos, something unexpected happened. The spacecraft's communications system picked up a strange signal. At first, the engineers thought it was just interference. Space was full of noise, after all. But the signal persisted, a low-frequency hum that couldn't be explained away. It wasn't much, but it was enough to capture Sarah's attention. What if it was something important? What if this signal meant something? The kind of breakthrough humanity needed to keep going. Sarah, you need to take a look at this, one of the engineers said over the comms, pulling her out of her deep thoughts. I'm on my way, Sarah replied, feeling a sudden rush of adrenaline. She had no idea what it could be, but the possibility that it was something significant, something real, was enough to spark a fleeting hope. As she hurried to the command center, she couldn't shake the thought that this strange signal might just be the turning point they needed, the breakthrough that would unite them, that would give them a reason to keep pushing forward. The hum of the spacecraft was steady, almost soothing, but as Sarah entered the command center, everything seemed to shift. The room was bathed in the soft glow of the monitors, their screens flashing with various data points, pulse rates, oxygen levels, system statuses. But at the center of it all was the signal. The engineers, their faces tight with concentration, were trying to isolate the source. It had been faint at first, but now it was clear. A low-frequency hum, rhythmic and deliberate, echoing through the comms system. Sarah, you need to see this, one of the engineers, Michael, said, his voice laced with a sense of urgency. He was pointing at a screen displaying the raw data. Sarah approached quickly, feeling the weight of the moment settle around her. She had no idea what this could mean, but instinctively, she knew it wasn't a glitch. What are we looking at? She asked. Michael tapped a few keys, adjusting the frequency analysis. It's not interference. It's too organized, too consistent. It's a signal, and it's coming from somewhere deep in space. A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Where? Can we track it? Michael adjusted a few more controls, zooming out on the star map. The signal wasn't coming from Earth, or any of the known space stations or satellites. It was originating from a region far off, somewhere in the void between Mars and Jupiter. It's not even within our usual exploration range, he said, his voice now filled with a mix of disbelief and excitement. We're looking at something potentially much farther out. And it's not random noise. It's deliberate. Sarah took a deep breath, her mind racing. The implications were staggering. A signal from deep space? Was it a natural phenomenon? Or, more likely, something much more significant? Could it be extraterrestrial? She glanced over at Elon's face on a nearby screen. His expression was unreadable, but she could see his brow furrowing as he processed the information. This changes everything, Elon said quietly. Sarah nodded. We need to figure out what it is, Elon. Now. The next few hours were filled with feverish activity as Sarah and the engineers tried to isolate the signal further. They adjusted parameters, recalibrated instruments, and rerouted communications channels. With each passing minute, The signal grew clearer, more distinct. It was as though someone, or something, was trying to reach them. In the meantime, Sarah kept the crew updated. They were all aware that something unusual was happening, but the crew, already on edge due to Jack's deteriorating health and the mental toll of space travel, didn't need more uncertainty. As the night turned into early morning, the signal became more structured. It wasn't just a hum. It was a series of patterns, almost like a language. Sarah could feel her pulse quicken. Whatever it was intelligent. "Listen to this," Michael said, pulling up a waveform on his screen. The pattern of the signal shifted, becoming more pronounced, more deliberate. The sound echoed in the command center, and Sarah felt her skin prickle as the realization set in. This wasn't an accident. It was communication. "Can you translate it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael exchanged a glance with another engineer, Kayla. "We're not sure yet. It's unlike anything we've encountered before. It's not radio waves. It's more complex, almost like a code." The next few days were a blur. The crew had been informed, but no one knew quite what to make of the discovery. They were all still recovering from the stress of the mission, and now they had to face this, something that defied all their previous understanding of the universe. Jessica, ever the leader, tried to keep the crew focused. "We need to stay calm," she said during a meeting in the crew quarters. "This could be something incredible, but it could also be a coincidence. We're not making any assumptions until we know more." The crew nodded in agreement, but the tension was palpable. It wasn't just Jack's health that worried them now. It was the unknown. The deep space signal had introduced a new layer of uncertainty, a new complexity that no one had anticipated. Despite the confusion and fear, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the signal was important. It wasn't just random interference. It was something that could change everything. On the 5th day after the signal first appeared, Michael came to Sarah with a breakthrough. "Sarah, we think we've cracked it," he said, his voice tight with excitement. Sarah followed him to the control panel. There, on the screen, was a series of numbers and symbols that seemed to make sense. They looked like a primitive form of encryption, but there was something strangely familiar about them. "We believe this is a form of communication," Michael said, pointing to the symbols. "It's a pattern that repeats, almost like a coded message. It could be a first step toward understanding who, or what, sent it." Sarah's heart raced. This could be the moment. If they could crack the code, if they could understand what was being communicated, it might hold the key to everything. This could be a step toward interstellar communication, a breakthrough that would change humanity's place in the universe forever. She turned to Elon, who had joined the call. "We need to keep this quiet for now. Let's see if we can figure this out before we alert the public. If this is what we think it is, we need to control the narrative." Elon nodded, his usual playfulness gone. "Agreed. But we need to be prepared for the possibility that this could be something bigger than we can handle. This changes everything, Sarah." Over the next few weeks, the crew and the team back on Earth worked tirelessly, decoding the message. It wasn't easy. There were moments of frustration and many false leads. But slowly, piece by piece, the message began to form. And when it finally became clear, Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The message was simple, yet profound. "We are here. We have watched you. We will come." It was a declaration, a message from an intelligence that had been watching humanity. And the last part sent chills down Sarah's spine. "We will come." In the quiet of the command center, Sarah stared at the screen, feeling a mix of awe and fear. The discovery of alien life was no longer a question. It was a reality. And now, they had to prepare for what would come next. The message echoed in Sarah's mind, a constant refrain that she couldn't shake. "We are here. We have watched you. We will come." The words were simple, but their implications were anything but. The crew was aware of the message now, and it had brought an unsettling mix of awe and fear. The weight of the discovery settled over everyone, the silence that followed it thick with uncertainty. The days following the decoding of the message were some of the most intense Sarah had ever experienced. The entire world was on the verge of a breakthrough, but the next steps were unclear. Was the message a sign of impending contact? Or was it a warning? No one could say for sure. As Sarah sat in her quarters aboard the spacecraft, staring out into the vastness of space, Her mind raced. She had always believed in the possibilities of space exploration, the promise of the unknown. But now, the unknown had become terrifyingly real. The crew, too, was grappling with the revelation. Jessica had called another meeting, and as everyone gathered, Sarah could see the tension in their eyes. They had come together to explore Mars, to make history, but now they were facing something far more extraordinary and potentially dangerous. "Everyone," Jessica began, her voice steady but strained, "we need to stay focused. This mission was about us, about human achievement. But now we've got a new reality to contend with. We're not just exploring Mars anymore. We've been watched, and we've been contacted." She paused, letting the gravity of the words settle in. "I'm not going to pretend like I have all the answers," Jessica continued, "but we've trained for the impossible. Now, we have to deal with it." Raphael, who had been unusually quiet, cleared his throat. "We need to be prepared. We don't know what we will come really means. It could mean they're on their way now, or it could mean something else entirely. But we can't afford to let our guard down." Mina nodded, her face grim. "The physiological effects of space travel have already been hard enough on all of us. Jack's condition isn't getting any better. We need to decide if we're going to continue the mission to Mars or focus on this new development." Jack, sitting in a corner of the room, had become a shadow of himself. His once strong presence was diminished, his body too weak to participate in the conversation in a meaningful way. But his eyes were alert, listening intently. The signal had affected him just as much as the rest of them. "I agree with Raphael," Jessica said, breaking the silence. "We can't ignore the message, but our mission is to land on Mars. If we stop now, what does that say about us? We can't just give up." Sarah watched the crew members, the weight of their words pressing down on her. The decision they faced wasn't just about Mars anymore. It was about the unknown, an unknown that might be coming for them. Back on Earth, Elon's voice came through on the communication line. "Sarah, I've been following the progress, and I know you've all been grappling with this new development. But we need to act with caution. We can't be reckless. I want to be clear, whatever happens, the mission to Mars still stands. But we need to have contingency plans in place, in case things go sideways." Sarah nodded, though she knew that Elon's assurances, while important, didn't make the situation any less precarious. What if "we will come" meant an alien force was approaching? What if this was just the beginning of something much larger, something they couldn't predict or control? "I understand, Elon. We'll continue monitoring the situation, but we need to be prepared for anything." In the following days, the crew continued their work, but the uncertainty hung over them like a dark cloud. They kept receiving data from Earth, and every transmission contained new information. Some of it was reassuring, scientific analyses and strategies for coping with the psychological strain of space travel. But the more they learned about the signal, the more questions it raised. They had only scratched the surface of the message. Could there be more? Could this be the beginning of communication? Or was it just the first of many? Sarah's thoughts were interrupted when Mina approached her one evening, her face tense with concern. "Sarah, we have to talk," Mina said. "Jack's condition has worsened. I don't think he can continue. I don't know how much longer he can hold on." Sarah looked at her, her heart sinking. They had been doing everything they could to manage Jack's health, but space travel was taking a toll on his body. His bones had become fragile, and he was experiencing severe muscle weakness. The medical systems aboard the spacecraft were functioning, but they weren't designed for this kind of long-term strain. "I know," Sarah said, her voice tight, "but what else can we do? We're too far from Earth to get him back. He's one of the best engineers we have. Losing him would be a huge blow to the mission." Mina's voice softened. "I know, but it's not just about the mission anymore. It's about his health, and the longer we leave it, the worse it gets. He can't continue if we don't make a decision soon." Sarah exhaled deeply. The situation had reached a breaking point. They couldn't afford to lose Jack, but the strain on his body was undeniable. "We'll talk to the crew about it," Sarah said, her voice firm. "This isn't just my decision. We need to think about everyone's well-being and the mission's future." Later that day, Sarah called for a meeting in the common area. She knew it was time to face the reality of the situation, even if it meant making a decision no one wanted to make. "Crew, we need to talk about Jack," Sarah began. "His condition is deteriorating. Mina has advised that we rotate him out and get him the medical attention he needs, or he won't survive the journey. But I know how important Jack is to this mission. Losing him would be a setback we can't afford." Jack, who had been listening quietly, raised his hand. His voice was weak, but clear. "I don't want to be the reason this mission fails," he said softly. "If I'm a liability, then I need to step back. I won't be the one to hold you all back." There was a moment of silence in the room. The crew exchanged glances, and then Jessica spoke up. "Jack, we've trained for this, and we'll figure out how to make this work. But right now, your health is the priority. We'll continue without you if we have to, but we'll never leave anyone behind." Sarah felt a lump form in her throat. The unity of the crew was something she had always believed in, but hearing Jessica's words made it all the more real. They were a family, and in space, that bond would be the thing that held them together. As Sarah looked out at the stars that night, the weight of their decisions settled over her. Jack was too important to lose, but so was the mission. But in that moment, she realized that whatever happened, the crew had made it this far because they trusted each other, and that trust would carry them through whatever lay ahead, even the unknown. The crew had made their decision. Jack would remain on the spacecraft, but his condition had worsened to the point where he could no longer contribute to the mission. Sarah had spent the night carefully considering every option, but in the end, the priority was his health. The rest of the crew would continue their mission to Mars, but they would carry the weight of their colleagues' absence with them. In the quiet of the spacecraft, Sarah sat at her desk, reviewing the latest reports. Her mind kept returning to the message that had changed everything, the strange signal that had reached them from deep space. "We are here. We have watched you. We will come." The words reverberated in her thoughts, filling her with a mix of excitement and dread. What did it mean? And how would the world respond when they learned the truth? The team on Earth was already working with the decoded message, trying to piece together the next steps. But Sarah knew that the full scope of this discovery would take years to comprehend. And now, they had to move forward without Jack, but with a renewed sense of purpose. Mars was still waiting. Mina had worked tirelessly to stabilize Jack's condition as best as possible. She had done everything she could to make him comfortable, but even she knew there were limits. Jack had agreed to rest in his quarters, knowing full well that his absence from the team was inevitable. "I'll be fine," Jack had told her, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just make sure you all get to Mars. That's what matters." It was a sentiment that cut through Sarah's heart. Jack was a fighter, and his dedication to the mission had never wavered, even in the face of his own deteriorating health. She felt the loss keenly, but there was no time to dwell. The mission to Mars had to continue. The next few days were filled with preparations for the next leg of their journey. The spacecraft was on course, but it wasn't just about the technical aspects anymore. It was about something bigger. The world was waiting for them. The world that had once watched in awe as they launched, now waiting for a new chapter in the story of humanity's exploration of the stars. Jessica gathered the crew in the common area one final time before they entered the final stretch of their journey to Mars. "We've faced challenges we never could have predicted," she began, her voice steady despite the weight of the situation. "We've lost a valuable member of our team, and there's no easy way to say that. But we've also gained something invaluable. The discovery of a message from deep space. It's a turning point for humanity. We don't know what it means yet, but we can't forget why we're here. Mars is still our goal, and we will reach it." There was a moment of silence as everyone took in her words. Sarah could see the resolve in each of their eyes. They had come this far. They couldn't stop now. Raphael, always the practical one, spoke up. "The message has changed everything, but the mission hasn't. We need to stay focused, just like we always have. We're still the team that made it this far, and we're going to make it to Mars." Mina nodded, her gaze firm. "We'll carry Jack with us, in our hearts, and we'll finish this for all of us." As the crew resumed their tasks, the reality of the situation began to settle in. They were no longer just astronauts or explorers. They were the first humans to have made contact with an intelligence beyond Earth. That thought alone was enough to keep them going. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. But even as Sarah worked alongside them, a nagging thought lingered at the back of her mind. The signal had been clear. We are here. We have watched you. We will come. What would happen when they did? Were they prepared for what was to come next? The thought was as thrilling as it was terrifying. The days blended together as the spacecraft sped toward Mars. The crew continued to monitor Jack's condition, making sure he was as comfortable as possible, but there was no denying the toll it was taking on him. He was a shell of his former self, and Sarah couldn't help but feel the weight of his absence in every decision they made. But despite the uncertainty and the challenges, there was an undeniable sense of purpose among the crew. They had come to space to make history, but now they were part of a much bigger story. A story that transcended Mars, transcended the stars. They were the ones who had made first contact with an alien intelligence. That alone would change the course of humanity forever. As the spacecraft neared Mars, the team began preparing for landing. The technical challenges were immense, but nothing seemed impossible anymore. They had faced worse. They had survived longer. And now, they were about to make history. The planet's rusty red surface loomed ahead, and the crew couldn't help but feel the excitement of nearing their destination. They had done it. They were about to land on Mars. "I can't believe we're finally here," Jessica said as she looked out at the planet. "We've made it." Sarah nodded, a sense of awe settling over her. Mars was no longer a distant dream. It was real, and it was just the beginning. The moment of landing was everything they had trained for, and so much more. As the spacecraft's feet touched the Martian soil, a cheer erupted from the crew. They had made it. After all the struggles, all the uncertainty, they had reached their destination. But even as they celebrated, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that the journey was far from over. The world had watched as they touched down on Mars. But somewhere out there, beyond the red planet, there was something else watching them. Something waiting. And as the crew of the first manned mission to Mars took their first steps onto the planet's surface, they knew that this was just the beginning of a new chapter for humanity. They had set foot on another world, yes, but they had also opened the door to something far more profound, an era of discovery, of connection, and of exploration that would forever alter the course of history. The stars above seemed to shimmer with promise, as if in response to their achievement. They had made contact with the unknown, and now they stood at the precipice of something even greater. The story of their mission wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?